You might remember that it was not long ago we had a terrible shooting that took place in New Zealand. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, said that they were going to work on gun reforms and at the time praising Facebook for removing 1.5 million videos of the attack.
1.5 million times. The fact that only 1.2 of those times has been automated tells me there, of course, are powers to take a very direct approach to instances of speech that incites violence or that incites hate.
Now, since that time, Australia has passed a new law that could see big tech executives jailed, for example, if the platforms host any violent video content. The Attorney General, Christian Porter, saying that the new penalty regime would target social media firms and clamp down on the circulation of content that broadcasts violent crimes. That's a story appearing online at CNBC. Joining us to put this in perspective is Satya Marar, who is a policy director at the Australian Taxpayers Alliance, joining us from Australia, tweeting at Mr. Jeet. Satya, welcome. Thank you for being here today.
Hey, thanks for having me.
What specifically does this law now do, and how is it a change from what it was before the law was passed?
So this is a world-first law that prohibits a website from sharing violent, abhorrent content in the form of video. And it makes it an offense not just to host, well, not necessarily to host the content, but to not take it down quickly enough. It uses the word expeditiously. Now, the problem is how they try to define violent, abhorrent content, because it's a vague definition. There are some categories, rape, torture, murder, killing. But if you look at the categories, the word torture, for example, doesn't specify whether it's torture with consent or not. So technically, a website that has BDSM material could be in trouble. And technically, the person who runs that site could be put in jail for up to 3 years, or could be fined about 10% of their company's profits. So it's an incredibly worrying law. And the issue is, in terms of how quickly they're meant to take it down, that isn't specified in the law. So you will have to be dragged in front of a court, in front of a judge or a jury to try and determine whether you act quickly enough. And that's going to cost a lot of money, take a lot of time. You're going to see many companies either not live stream at all, or they're going to have algorithms and things to block anything that even appears violent. So you will have a situation where human rights activists, for example, trying to highlight videos of abuse by governments or militaries, will potentially not be able to do that anymore because it just isn't worth it for the platform to take the risk of hosting that type of content. So it is very worrying. It has a horrible precedent for free speech and discourse online.
And by the way, he said BDSM. Satya used that term, bondage videos. Sexual bondage videos. I don't know that anyone needs that explanation, but I thought I'd throw that out there just in case. I wanted to see if we could, Satya, can you give us at least an understanding? I mean, obviously in the United States, there's a strong tradition of First Amendment rights. What's the tradition of free speech in Australia and New Zealand?
Well, to be frank, it isn't really very good. We don't have First Amendments. We have an implied freedom of political communication in our Constitution, which is incredibly weak and is almost, it's very rarely used. It's actually an offense in Australian law to offend someone based on their race. So we've actually seen cartoonists who, made edgy cartoons or journalists, trying to comment on sensitive issues being dragged through the court system or the Human Rights Commission for their free speech. So it's not very good. And I think a law like this probably won't stand for very long if it's passed in the USA because you guys have that First Amendment. But I would not be surprised if many state lawmakers try passing one anyway, because big tech companies are very easy targets, and they're politically favorable targets, even though this law will disproportionately affect smaller players more.
Satya Marar was with us, the policy director at the Australian Taxpayer Alliance. On this law specifically, I wonder, does it cover live events? For example, if somebody is streaming an event that is live and something happens that was unexpected, a shot is fired, something happens that's violent, is that something that would also be subject to penalty? Would the people who stream that or are in charge of the content, would they also be subject to penalty?
Well, according to the legislation, the person who puts the video up has to have some connection with the violent, abhorrent content. So if someone is just, filming a street protest and suddenly someone ends up getting shot on that protest, that probably would not result in a conviction. But the mere risk of this sort of thing happening with, politically sensitive events in some countries being filmed, there is a danger that companies will overreact and start to overtly censor their own platforms. We've already seen this happen. So after the Prime Minister of Australia found out about the attack, he made an announcement saying he was going to be a lot tougher on internet service providers and websites. And two Australian companies that provide mobile internet responded by blocking the websites 4chan and Lively, which at one point hosted the video, even though the attack was actually advertised on 8chan, and Lively reacted just as quickly as Facebook to take the video down. So the issue isn't just the law itself, it's what it will provoke companies into doing and what the implications are for our discourse and for our media.
Was there any? What was the intent of the law? Is it to eliminate that speech, therefore, hopefully prevent it from spreading, or is it to? I'm not quite sure what it's intended to do. What the effect of it is expected to be for those who supported it.
Well, it seems to me that what you have is this underlying assumption that the reason why people do horrible things like live streaming a massacre is they seek attention and there's this massive online market for such content. But it's completely untrue. The world was a much more violent place before the internet, objectively speaking, before video streaming. There's no evidence at all that these attacks would not be happening unless they were streamed, and there's no evidence that even the most obscure websites didn't take it down as soon as they could once they found out it was up. So really, the only rational motivation in all this seems to be this idea of governments trying to appear tough on terrorism and capitalizing on political concerns. I mean, we have an election coming up next month in Australia, and it's quite telling that the party that's currently in government is pushing this law. They're probably going to lose the election. And the opposition party, who's probably going to win, have said, we have massive problems with this law, but we're going to pass it anyway, implying that they don't want to look weak on terror. So it's basically a feel-good law that massages politicians' egos and makes them think that they'll appeal to the electorate. The Attorney General here has come out saying that most Australians support a law like this, and yet it was rammed through Parliament. It was passed without being properly read or debated in the last minute. Regular procedure was given up. So, I'm being cynical here, but there's every reason why this is a politically motivated stunt and nothing more.
Well, when you said elections are coming soon, you had me there, so we will leave it at that point. Satya Marar, thank you for joining us on POTUS today.
No worries, thank you.
Satya Marar is Policy Director at the Australian Taxpayers Alliance. Speaking of the law that would and could see big tech executives jailed if their platforms host violent content. This is about the law that would notify the federal police if they became aware that their service is streaming violent content. It's again, something you wouldn't see in the United States likely, but it may formulate the attempted legislation in this country. Part of the reason we wanted to talk to Satya. By the way, he is tweeting at Mr. Jeet, Jeet.